Whew, this is a lot of words. A special shout out to all of you who support this podcast by buying us a cup of coffee, reading the newsletter, and listening to the show. This is the first episode of Season 11, and we couldn't have gotten this far without you. Thank you. If you want to support this show, help us keep the lights on and the internet running, click the Buy Us a Coffee link in this podcast show notes. And now, on to the show. Hey, good morning, everyone. Welcome to Season 11, Episode 1, the very first one of Season 11 on the Coffee People podcast, which is part of the Roast West Coast Coffee Network and presented by Roastery Coffee Packaging. I'm Ryan Woldt, and this is the show where we meet cool human beings from all corners of the coffee industry and share their stories. Wow. Season 11. I did not think we would get this far. We're kicking off the season with a chat with an entrepreneur, designer, Gen X New Yorker, Stephan von Muehlen, the co-founder and CEO of Steady Equipment Company, whose core effort is the Poursteady, the professional's automatic pour-over coffee machine that combines the precision of robotics with the drama and theater of coffee brewing experience. Stephan and the Poursteady team recently added the 2-cup PS2 to their lineup of 5 and 3-cup machines. We'll share photos and videos on coffeepeoplepodcast.com. But if you're already almost sold, head to poursteady.com to get all the tech specs and details. You may have seen one of their machines assisting a barista in a cafe or on display at the Specialty Coffee Association Expo, which is where I got the opportunity to use the new PS2 to brew up a pour-over of our partner Coffee Cycle Roasting's Peru coffee. I was thinking about it when I brewed a V60 of Nicaragua Peaberry for Maria Coffee at home this morning. I had to do all the work myself, and I spent most of the time wondering how big this show would have to get before I could hire a podcaster's assistant. I think we still have a little ways to go on the Coffee People podcast. Even though I was lost in a daydream, I managed to fill my coffee mug all the way to the top, and I'm ready to relax, sit back, and sip away. I hope your coffee cup is filled to the brim too, because it is time for another Coffee People podcast. This one featuring Stephan von Muehlen, co-founder and CEO of the Steady Equipment Company, known for the Poursteady.
My name is Stephan von Muehlen, and I am a founder and CEO of Poursteady, and we make commercial coffee equipment here in Brooklyn and Gowanus, New York, for the world.
And I saw these. It's the reason I reached out. I saw the machine and got to play with it a little bit at SEA. Before we get to the machine and what you're doing there, I have a very important question that I've been asking most of my recent guests, and it's what I'll remember after the show. Do you have a favorite Keanu Reeves movie?
Oh man, I think Point Break is the first thing that comes to mind. But actually, River's Edge. I'm going to stand by River's Edge.
I don't think I've seen River's Edge in like 20 years. That's an old movie.
Yeah, well, I was like a teenager. I was sort of the target audience for it, and like, I will always love Crispin Glover and Keanu Reeves and Ione Skye.
I'm gonna go back and check it out.
Oh, and it also has Dennis Hopper as the creepiest person alive. I mean, it's a dark movie from a different time, but I'm Gen X, so I was a teenage boy in suburban Maryland, so I loved it.
That was Dennis Hopper's heyday back in the day. He was the
so
bad guy
weird
in a bunch of stuff.
Yeah.
You just mentioned, you're Gen X. That was kind of your teenage years. Who are you? What was your do you have a experience with coffee from back then that made you think, oh, this is interesting, or that you kind of remember as being a seminal coffee moment?
I mean, I have a seminal coffee moment in New York. Well, there's a couple. I got to New York as a 17-year-old undergraduate, and I went to a bodega or deli or whatever, and I asked for a coffee, and I wasn't much of a coffee drinker, but it was exams or whatever. I was trying to figure it out. And the guy says, "Do you want it regular?" And I said, "Yes." And Then he said 4 or 5 scoops as he like filled the cup halfway up with milk, took a big plastic spoon into a cup of sugar, and then did like 5 scoops, like foot, 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 and then topped it off with a little coffee and handed it to me. And that was regular coffee in New York City in 94 or whatever that was, or 90. The first real specialty coffee I actually had was there was a little coffee shop in Williamsburg when I lived there, probably 20 years ago now. I had been drinking so much coffee that I would twitch, and then I would go cold turkey. And I was just drinking whatever coffee there was. And then it was called like St. Helens was this little coffee shop. It's not there anymore. It was the first time I'd had like a real cappuccino with like latte art, on it. And a couple times I would sort of break my coffee fast by going in there and having my first cup in a month and being like, oh my God, this is incredible. But then it was just normal coffee until, as a designer and as a, whatever it is to make me start a company making coffee machines with my friends. It wasn't until that happened that we sort of looked at coffee and learned really about the specialty coffee world and everything that goes into it, and have really appreciated that it is just such a wonderful, rich, and diverse industry that I like, as like, if you're going to be in an industry like one where you're meeting like farmers and suits and baristas and everybody in between from all over the world, is like a pretty good industry to be in. So we didn't come in as coffee experts. We came in as designers and engineers with sort of the understanding that we were making a tool for coffee professionals, and that's sort of where we started.
That kind of leads me into like one of my things that I was interested about, which was what inspired the creation of the Poursteady. And we should, before we go too far, define for everyone what the Poursteady is. So when we say Poursteady, what are we talking about?
Yeah, well, 10 years ago now, we started the company with a few other co-founders. What a Poursteady is we make an automated pour over coffee machine that really honors the sort of the traditional manual pour over method, which in some ways is, the simplest, oldest way to make a cup of coffee. It's just the coffee and hot water made to like highlight the parts of the coffee that you're trying to highlight and honor the whole supply chain that gets you there. But we've kind of automated that so that a single nozzle can move between multiple cups and kind of handle all of the robotic parts of the process. So you still have a person, you still have the coffee. They're still the ones touching the coffee and putting it there and serving the customer. But we sort of take care of the hot water, the agitation through various pour patterns and timing. So you can really kind of replicate a manual pour over in a repeatable way in a commercial or retail coffee environment.
I'm thinking of myself in the year that I was a barista, which wasn't very long, but it was enough for me. But, trying to do 2 pour overs at once, and then also talking to a customer, and also, maybe
Yeah.
the phone is ringing or something. And how much easier it would have been to be able to just kind of prep everything, hit the buttons, and let the pour over thing do it, because my consistency would be failing as I was multitasking.
Right. And that really is also the inspiration. So to tell the story forwards rather than backwards, where like what the product is how we got to that product. It's a funny story that like had some twists and turns, but there were two friends of mine who were Carnegie Mellon roboticists doing like kind of academic aerospace robotics stuff and art projects. So they were making motion control systems for a number of kinds of industries and clients. But they liked working together, and one of them lived in Pittsburgh, and the other one lived here in Brooklyn. And I was working for another company, so I sort of knew of them and had befriended Stuart Hayes, who's a mechanical engineer. And so fast forward, we're sort of friends and colleagues, and Mark Sibanek, the electrical engineer, was the coffee fan. He was like the typical engineer, sort of obsessing about like, this experience by changing the variables and connoisseurship and like, finding good coffee shops. And they had gone out to California, and Mark dragged Stuart to a Blue Bottle, and they watched the barista trying to make more than one pour over at a time while the line grew and people get frustrated. And, they napkin sketched the idea of having this nozzle move around and do that. And they just thought it was funny and they shelved it for a while. And then, a couple years later, probably in 2013, they built the first prototype, which stored some machinists and an engineer. So they could kind of, like, Mark had just worked on another project that they could use some of the code and some of the hardware for it. So they kind of Frankenstein this nozzle that could move back and forth and pour hot water, and brought it to a maker fair, which is sort of a glorified science fair that year I think had 70,000 people at it or something. And I went just to help them serve coffee. I kind of had always gone to these maker fairs with different projects or jobs or whatever. And that year I was just going to help serve coffee at my friend's booth. And in 2 days, we served 800 cups of coffee, got all of these like ribbons from all the organizers, and were featured on the Tested blog, and just like kind of saw the joy of like giving out coffee off of a robot, and how like the Maker folks or the Maker Fair folks, they're a San Francisco based company. So they were sort of ahead of New York in 2013 on sort of the coffee appreciation.
Mm-hmm.
And so, they were just like, oh my God, good coffee at the Maker Fair. It's the first time ever. This is just like Blue Bottle. And like, we just kind of got all of the momentum from the feedback. We like, seriously, it inspired delight on the first day. And then we made 800 cups of coffee and it worked. And we just like pumped out coffee, and then we were celebrated. I was like, oh my God, guys, I'm between jobs right now. Do you mind if I try to do something with this? And they're like, sure, whatever. And then, we got into an incubator through the city that's trying to nurture hardware businesses here, and had some, mentorship and a cohort to kind of do the formation stuff, and met our patent attorney, and, just sort of was shepherded through a program that the city runs here in New York to be a startup. And, and then we went to the expo in 2015 in Seattle and shared a 10 by 10 booth and took home the best piece of commercial coffee equipment that year. Like, we got the plaque. It was just sort of hole in one after hole in one in a weird way, which was misleading, honestly, because like everything we did, like we designed it, we agreed on everything, we launched it, it worked. We took it to the trade show, we won the award, and like we started selling machines, and we weren't like paying ourselves, but we didn't actually have to get any, borrow any money, or, we just started making machines and selling them out of the garage space, essentially, at that point.
You're going through it, very quickly and making it kind of sound like it was like no big deal, almost like very casual. But the process of getting a startup and getting into an incubator and the competition in, New York and San Francisco is still very challenging. So I want to make a point to say, you're obviously putting in time and work and to get to
this point. And it wasn't like, it wasn't exactly my first rodeo. I had been previously, it was my second startup. So I previously co-founded a company with some other engineers that I'd worked with at another company, where I was a proposal writer. So I was a proposal writer for an engineering company. And then I split with two engineers to start a company making like home automation to help people save electricity. And did that, and like my partner raised money and did the whole VC venture back thing. So I went from being a proposal writer to like being a founder at, a wild ride with a VC backed company that actually I'm still proud of, but I never made a dollar for, because eventually it was acquired for less than the money that was raised, which means the sweat equity of the common stockholders. So I kind of knew all of the, the 3-card Monty of it, and it is just capitalism. But, I understood the rules, and I understood the steps. And this little incubator like reinforced all that. And, so I was pretty good at kind of pitching it, despite not being a comfortable public speaker. I kind of faced some of my fears, and it's still, it's the entrepreneur's life. I'm not necessarily advocating for anybody, because it was funny, steady growth for a while. And then we like saw the pandemic and got scared. And then things really picked up in the Middle East and in Saudi Arabia for unknown reasons. And we had survived all the supply chain stuff because we had kept all of our stuff pretty local. So we were insulated from a lot of like the hardship that other companies were facing and trying to get stuff out the door. And that was just a confluence of like, a good instinct and good timing, but as orders picked up in the middle of the supply chain crisis, we could keep filling them. So we just caught a wave in the Middle East that made me think that, okay, now is the time to strike. And so we like rehired engineers. A lot of the co-founders had split. Like I was, a designer, but, we were just sort of selling the same machine for a number of years and learning a lot and evolving the software and developing, relationships with vendors and distributors and going to trade shows and, meeting the coffee world, but sort of selling the same thing for a few years. And so suddenly we caught a wave and invested in developing a new product. And I'm not embarrassed to say it took twice as long as I budgeted for. Rather than it taking a year, it's taken 2 years. But I'm really excited about where the product is now. I don't need to hijack the conversation, but we have a little bit of a lift now where we're actually bringing the product to market and it's working, better than before. And it fixes a lot of or at least attempts to address a lot of the lessons that we learned over the years by supporting one product to one community for so long. Sort of we were able to identify, what was hard about making them, what was hard about selling them, what was hard about installing them, what was hard about maintaining them, what was hard about supporting them. And so my sort of, my product design education is really a user-centered design kind of, philosophy that, has come and gone a little bit in the world, but it really starts with looking at all of the different stakeholders and trying to remain humble and understand like what you make, how it interacts with, for a coffee shop, how it interacts with the customer, how it interacts with the barista, how it interacts with the manager, how it interacts with the technician, how it interacts with us, how it interacts with the support. And all of those things could be improved, but they required a new way of doing it a little bit. So the second generation Poursteady, does a little bit for everybody. And the first generation Poursteady also did. My pitch back then was, and still is that the barista is good for the customer because, they get the same cup that they had last time and they're not waiting so long and they know that they're getting a consistently delicious product no matter what time of day it is or who's working behind the bar. And then behind the bar, they're able to serve the coffee and the customer, but not have to zone out on scales and timers. So in the end, it sort of, for a barista, it's similar to pulling shots, during a rush. You can make 60 cups of pour over in an hour just by operating the Poursteady with one person. And they'll all be the same on the 5-cup machine or more or less. But then for the manager, it's, it is about hiring and staffing and training. It's not like we're trying to get rid of baristas with too much automation that they're not relevant anymore. It's that we just want pour over to work as well as espresso in a busy coffee shop because, the industry sort of has had this up and down trend with pour over where 10 years ago, it was become so popular at home and among the connoisseurs and the baristas that they wanted to bring it into the shops. But then you kind of met this reality where it could totally break the throughput and the consistency and the training. It complicates all of those things, tenfold. So we were just trying to make it work, in that. And so we kind of looked at it as a problem to solve for. And, that's where the kind of the designerly education part came in. So we always knew that we weren't, the coffee snobs, that there were coffee professionals that knew more than us, that had better palates than us. We remain servants to them. We now do have some really excellent, former baristas and coffee pros here at Poursteady. Our software developer was a barista and a shop manager that took code course, during the pandemic and came out a Python developer. And, our sales guy, Travis, was at Stumptown for a while. So we and Holly, who handles our social media, was also one of the first baristas to use a Poursteady years ago. And then switched their career or pivoted and came back. And now they're kind of managing all of our social media and marketing stuff. So we've backfilled with coffee pros, but we really started with engineers and designers. And that kind of explains why our solution is so different. It's it is industrial proof motion control with, brushless DC servo motors and dedicated motion controllers running on a custom Linux stack, with Yocto, yada, it's a piece of technology that you don't just stumble upon, trying to build something in your garage or fix espresso machines. These are Carnegie Mellon engineers who worked on, for all kinds of industries. So we kind of brought that skill set, but we really had to learn about the coffee. And the trick, was that we just made sure it was a tool and tried to simplify it as much as possible, but had as much flexibility in there as we could. And, it was funny. One of the first things we learned when we had a coffee shop owner really excited about it. And so they let us put it on their bar there, and they wanted us to work with Oscar, their barista. So Oscar kind of became this this boogeyman that we had to think about for the next few years, because we showed up with our laptops being like, let's dial in some coffee. And he was just like, get out of my coffee shop with your robots, nerds. I am not down for this. And so we left, and the other guys were like, man, that sucked. And I was just like, we have to change what we're doing to design this for him. We need to make sure that the baristas are getting the benefit and are the hero. And so, that was the approach we took when we started developing the app. Was like, how do the dialing in of the pour over can turn that barista into somebody who's now the most powerful barista in the world, but in the shop, it also allows them to worry about the other stuff too that goes into serving coffee in a retail environment.
When you say the app, you're referring to the way that the barista would program the Poursteady to distribute the water and how it's set up, whether it's I think there's a 2 and a 5 and something.
Yeah. And so rather than it being nerds with laptops or some data-driven spreadsheet of variables that you could implement, which exists in the world and on coffee equipment now, and it's cool how much control you can have, no shade on spreadsheets and robots, make following charts and diagrams, that is true, but it had to be a lot easier and more intuitive, and it had to kind of speak the language of the manual pour overs made by baristas. So we even went so far as to make the units grams, even though we were measuring water with a flow meter. We were doing, instead of milliliters, we were doing we were really trying to make it just at the expense of being precise or accurate from an engineering perspective. We were like, no, the barista's right. These are grams of water. These are not cubic centimeters or milliliters. But what I learned, since then though, is that we stripped all of the settings and everything off of the machine and put it into a web app. Because in 2013, what we had sort of figured was that putting a screen on this machine means that it is always going to look like a 2013 machine. It'll look like that Android touchscreen or whatever it was that, you could get that year. And we were looking at the Italian, we wanted to make something that didn't look weird in a coffee shop. So we were looking at the beautiful old Italian machines and sort of thinking about these sort of analog and blended controls. And we just said, screw it. Let's make the app something we can update and keep the machine just synced with the app, and we'll do it. And then we did it in the way that made sense, because it was literally we used code that the engineering team had used previously to maintain a rover that was in the desert while they were in Pittsburgh. They built this test bed rover that these other scientists had to take out into some environment to test, but they didn't want to have to go into the Atacama Desert or whatever it was. So before the Internet of Things, there was a way that engineers could keep real-time link to their robots in the world. And so we just used that, and it then became the Internet of Things and all of that other stuff that telemetry and all the other words you throw at it. But it was kind of how the machine was developed in the first place, because Stuart was in Brooklyn and Mark was in Pittsburgh and they'd done this before. I don't know. That was a tangent, but
that's what this show is about. I mean, we're telling the story of this machine, and I mean, it has legitimately, NASA level science into it. Yes.
Well, yeah. I mean, sometimes NASA is funny too, because the copy machine in the office is more complicated than what's at the space station. They keep it simple to make it safe in some ways. And mechanically, we bring that also to the machine. Like from an aerospace perspective, every motor is a point of failure. And, when you want to they call them actuators in aerospace. When you want to put an actuator in space, you have to kind of assume it's $1 million a motor, to develop it, just because of all the testing and all the stuff you have to go through to make sure that it cannot fail up there. So having super reliable overbuilt engineering systems, but having fewer of them is kind of like the right way to have reliable systems in hard to get to places. And so for the coffee industry, that translates is like, we need to have, 100% uptime, like you're building businesses around these machines. So they have to be reliable. And, with Stewart and Mark, like that meant that we're using off the shelf, rails and carriages and motors and motor controllers that are used for, these kind of industrial foolproof fail-safe systems. And they're not cheap. So as a result, what's clever about the Poursteady and also what makes it like not robotic, frankly, is that all of the motion of the nozzle, and the nozzle can pour, spirals and circles and spots, and we can draw little hearts with it. And, and it's just this little 1/4-inch gooseneck nozzle that can spin around and literally fly from like one cup to the other and keep them all topped off and do all of that calculation. But it's essentially a frame with this water, this spout dancing around in it. And there's theater in there. It's really intended to express the value of the coffee. The other reason to get a Poursteady is that if you're serving $20 a pound, coffee from, Costa Rica or whatever, you don't want it to look like it's 7-Eleven coffee. Even though 7-Eleven coffee could be good if it was, the right coffee and the right brewer and served at the right time. It's very hard to sell the coffee for $6 a cup if it comes out of an urn,
Sure.
And so this kind of, the theater of it sort of does that. That also kind of gave the design direction some real clarity. It's like, this is a frame that shows off the making of the coffee, and we are bringing this sort of precision and aesthetic sort of thing to it. And that was what we saw that first day, was the actual like, okay, we've got delight. Like that's ephemeral and hard to like put in a bottle. But like, I just showed up to help some friends, and we just had a line of 50 people that we were just getting a cup of coffee out to every minute. And they were just like super into it, even though they waited. And I was like, okay, there's got to be something here.
Yeah, the presentation of it is something. I was watching some videos this morning and frankly shocked at how fast it was. The nozzle was going between the different cups and controlling that.
Yeah, and that is because we are using like really over-engineered motors and motor controllers. It's a closed-loop brushless DC servo motor with our own encoder on it, which means that the motor controllers know where it is supposed to be, how much power it is providing at any instant along that. And if there is a deviation between the power it's giving and where it thinks it should be, it can have all of these kind of fail-safe, things. So we're controlling how fast it speeds up and how fast it slows down. We're controlling the direction of how it goes, but you can also grab it and like play, arm wrestle with it, and it'll know that something is stopping it from moving and it's supposed to be there, and it'll just go limp, and then you push the button, it'll wake back up and try to go where it was. But like, to develop that for a coffee machine would have added years, and these are off the shelf motor controllers that are not cheap. So like, there is a company, a Korean company that kind of copied the form factor and sort of the application of Poursteady. Like Korea was a big market, and there's a Korean company that's done okay, sort of saying, okay, here's a $15,000 5-cup pour over coffee machine. And it looks very similar, but rather than having one nozzle that's moving, in this kind of, whatever elegant way of going across the linear actuator and then having a tilt, so to combine them for the, the gesture that the Poursteady has, they have 6 little nozzles that are moving around, like a 3D printer kind of, but really just 2D motion. And to my mind, it just looks a little creepy. and I'm biased, so, like respect, but like, it looks weird, and there's like a weirdness thing when you're introducing new technology that you don't like. Between PS1 and PS2, like I've been trying to make it less weird, like I want it to be less of an alien technology, and theirs looks a little more alien. Fine, but they also have a problem with reliability and service, because to make 5 nozzles move in 2 dimensions, you either need to have some very clever underactuated stuff going on, or you need 10 motors, which makes it 5 times more likely. So you need cheaper motors, which makes them more likely to break, and you need more of them, which multiplies that. So they're just 10 times more likely to fail without knowing anything about the motors. It's just like, if a motor fails, it's going to happen. It's 5 times more likely on that machine. But we also are paying a lot of money for those motors and motors controllers, so that it has all of that like engineering already baked into it. To kind of develop that stuff, and maybe there's a way to cost optimize it as the volumes get bigger or something, but you don't learn all of that subtlety and implement it without like experiencing it. And the best way to do that is to use good stuff the right way. And so everything we use is engineered within spec to run 24/7 for 10 years in theory. Things break.
That's actually my follow-up question to this whole comment is if I'm the coffee shop and I'm using this machine and it does break, how challenging is it to repair? Or is it repairable?
I mean, they most certainly are repairable. I'm proud of our reputation for support, and it's something that we really like. I mean, whatever. Sound like it's a company that I own that I'm trying to hawk, which is, I only own part of it, and
There's
and I
some
am
truth in
actually
that.
proud of it. But like, our support though is something that like I've tried to maintain. When we started for the first 5-6 years, I was almost the only person who talked to anybody outside of the company. Like I did the customer support, I did the sales, I did the business development stuff, I did, the bureaucracy of it. There was 4 of us in a garage, 3 of us in a garage, but like that was my job to sort of, talk to people while everybody else worked in code and machines, and I had some say in the design stuff, but really I was just filling in all the gaps. But by the time we got bigger and could start to have more help, we still haven't hired a support person, which is good and bad. But what it means is that me, Greg, the other co-founder, Kate, our director of operations, Derek, the kind of director, manager of manufacturing, and Nico, who's our one full-time developer, all share the support together. And we all have a kind of a different take on it, our different expertise. Like Nico can really get into the code, and Derek is much closer to the machines and the parts and the components, and and I've kind of developed this whatever rapport or customer support or like attitude. And Kate kind of looks holistically at the effect of support on the other parts of the business, but we all have to do it. And we all kind of have to eat the dog food, and we kind of we burn out one at a time and then help each other out. But from my kind of designer perspective, it's great that we have everybody who are really can make changes in the company or in the code or in the product are getting direct feedback from the end customers. It's not like there's some telephone game where there's somebody whose job it is to try to help them, and they're looking at a spreadsheet, and then they're going to like go bother everybody about it. It's like, we're all on Slack together. We all share the same, software to kind of manage the communications, and like the handoffs at this point are pretty easy. So if it looks like it's more somebody's problem or somebody's too busy to do it, like we just kind of keep it rolling like leaf cutter ants. You drop it and you pick it up, which I think works surprisingly well, and it has made our products better. It's like we feel the pain as much as our customers do. So it's not like somebody else. It's never somebody else's problem. And the truth is, our machines are expensive, and we are building stuff, in sort of a low volume way in Brooklyn, which is just, counterintuitive for being a good idea, but it actually does work, and it works really well. And, we're set up to do more right now. With the new product, we're sort of anticipating growth. And so been in a new space since October, and it felt huge when we moved in, and then it felt cluttered and stuffed when we got everything here, and then it felt big again because like things were quiet for a minute, and now it's like we're planning for how we're going to pack everything in again. But whatever, that's again a tangent.
I think about a lot of the um, there's the aesthetic that we just talked about of this thing, and the presentation, the dance, as you mentioned, and you previously mentioned kind of automation as an aid as opposed to a replacement. When you're out there and you're the one out there talking to people, or you're at SEA, how often is that question of, is this going to replace me, coming up? I mean, are people worried about that, or is it easy for you just to step right past that and be like, no, this is to help, not replace?
I mean, I understand that there's like, a couple perspectives on it, on that part of automation replacing baristas, and there's a sort of arc of specialty coffee where baristas are the champions, like literally, and that's cool, for an industry to really celebrate the server like that, like the crucial interface is kind of awesome. um, but having a machine that is built as a tool for them versus a replacement for them is subtle, and it's not, the trajectory, the direction is the same, but it's not. I'm not lying when I say we're trying to balance technology and craft, and we're trying to bridge tradition with modern business needs, or human needs, really. And so what I've been saying for years about PS1 was that we're really just, like I said, trying to make pour over work as well as espresso in a busy coffee shop. And like, of course, the knee jerk reaction was not surprisingly that robots are coming for our jobs. But then anecdotally, I have spoken to baristas that work in, a regional chain that have, say, 5 locations, and the Poursteady is in 2 of them. And she told me, it's like, I hate working at those other locations because when people order a pour over, it breaks everything for the whole team, and and that's why we designed it the way, where we saw the pain of the barista and the pain of the customer, and that was like what made us think that there could be a way to do it. The resistance to automation and technology, like as in the industry, I think, and in the world, really changed over the pandemic, where we saw customers of ours that kept their pour steadies, but they took. I'm thinking of one customer in particular that built up a small chain with pour steadies and La Marzocco machines, and then in that summer of 2020 or 2021 or whatever it was, when like the PPP money came through, he just sort of wisely or unwisely replaced all the La Marzoccos with Eversys machines, because he was having a hard enough time before the pandemic maintaining staff and keeping people trained on coffee. And then like the pandemic changed everything, temporarily, and in some cases permanently. And when business picked up inevitably, like it was, as the pandemic faded, he had a more super, what do they call it? Super traditional, I think what Eversys was calling it, solution. But it definitely allowed him to hire, train, and maintain employees without quite the same challenges that he was having before. And if you kind of believe the radio or whatever, like it is having people in service industries stick around to do, to continue to do that. And again, it's kind of interesting what coffee has done or specialty coffee has done, because it's created kind of career paths that you can come into as a barista, but there's not a lot of people that want to continue to be a barista until they retire anyway. And this should help them as much as it should hurt them, or help them more than it should hurt them. We're a small company, and again, this is a cop out, and I know like there can be all kinds of perspectives, and I respect them. But as a small company, the fact that we're able to kind of swim in these waters and like keep manufacturing jobs in New York, and the privilege of being able to debate whether or not it makes good business sense to add a little more automation to this is not lost on me. But it's not like I'm Starbucks declaring one day we are going to have a barista-free shop. Not that Starbucks is going to do that, but I know of at least 3 startups that have tried, you know.
Actually, I just saw there's a fully employee-free shop that launched in Waukesha, Wisconsin in the last month. You've been doing this for 10 years, almost, since
Yeah,
2015 was
no,
that first show, but 10 years since.
2013 was the Maker Faire. So that was like, we formed in 2015, but like it was October of 2013, and then all of 2014 where we were just sort of in the, applying and getting in stuff, whatever. That first year was just sort of figuring out in the garage.
What would you say to somebody, what advice would you pass along based on kind of the last 10 years of this experience of being an entrepreneur?
I
Besides,
mean,
don't do it.
yeah, no, I mean, I I like to make things, like kind of. I don't know. It's like a dumb answer. I don't have really good advice. Like we have interns and I have friends, and it's unique. Everybody has a different set of challenges and goals and aspirations, and like I, you know, I rely. I mean, I don't know. Maybe this is also a little trite, but like the reason why Poursteady is at all and exists to this day and is as successful as it is, given everything, is my network. Is like the makers and the engineers. Like I went to college here, graduated as an artist. As an undergrad, I was painting oil pictures, and then ended up working as a metal fabricator because my roommate was. It was like my job out of college. We lived in a loft in Brooklyn. Like it was very Gen X. And then I, worked at this metal shop for a while, and then my girlfriend was applying to grad schools, so I applied, and a friend of mine had gone to this cool program at Stanford, which was like sounded cool, and I applied for that with like a weird artist's portfolio and metal fabrication, examples and some, personal art projects I'd done or whatever. And I got into this really cool design program where they literally said, "Congratulations, you made it in the back door to Stanford University, and now you can do whatever you want, and I'll sign off on it." And that gave me access to like a really amazing machine shop that was student run, that was like inspiring, that could do everything from welding to machining to casting, and it was 3D printing in the 90s. Like it was ahead of, and I learned CNC machining and just like what really cutting edge design and fabrication meant, the end of the century or millennium or whatever that was. And then I came back to New York, and I had like, my metal fabrication friends and artist friends and a new degree, and got my first office job as like a friend of mine was quitting his job and said, "You could do it. I won't let me leave until we find a replacement." And that's how I got my proposal writing job. And one thing kind of led to the other, and it was like just seizing opportunities as they presented themselves, I guess, and figuring out how to get it done with what was at hand. And luckily, the resources I sort of developed and the connections I developed in this city, making stuff for 30 years, means that at this point, it's weird. Like we have, we just signed a contract with a new contractor. This is too much information. Again, I go down these like weird pathways, but it has a point, I swear. We're trying to get through our certifications, obviously, with our new product. And we failed a flicker test, which means that, expect to fail things. Like the certification process is painful on purpose. And flicker means that somehow our switching of the PID controlled heater could affect how lights are on that circuit or in adjacent circuits, potentially,
Mm-hmm.
because of the universe, and it's a hard thing to measure, and it's a hard thing to test. It's invisible, it's like even instrumenting it doesn't really quite show it, like the meat computers all have different like refresh rates that you can't control for it. It's like a really weird problem. And it just turns out that there's this guy, Ed, who I've known for 20 years from like weird theater and avant-garde art in Williamsburg and Brooklyn, 20 years ago. But he's like a full systems engineer who's on patents that deal with Flickr. And so like when he comes by to see it, like he actually knows all the other people, from the artists on the manufacturing side, like whatever, he's just part of the community. And that's a weird resource to tap into, in the Bay Area. Like, yes, there is a consultancy that can help with Flickr. There are like super engineers that you can look up, and Ed is a super engineer, but it just feels oddly not surprising that, of course, that guy that was like making electronic music at Tiana's loft is now like essential to getting this company through the certification process.
That was one of the things I missed the most when I left New York was the startup that I was working in. There was maybe 15 of us, and we were all working there and pushing that startup forward, but we were all doing our own things also
Yeah,
outside of that. Everyone had this thing they were so passionate about, and they were working 100 hours a week because they had to do their startup job to help funnel their time and energy and
yeah,
effort into their thing. And it was
yeah,
so motivating to go to work every day and be like, what happened with your project last night or last weekend? Or, is
yeah.
do you have an art show or a band? And it was just nonstop inspiration that in an unhealthy way would also push you to do those things. But that's how we kept moving forward. And that is something that I lost when I left.
Yeah. And it's something that I'm addicted to. Like I'm doing everything wrong. Like I have a business making hardware that we're selling in Asia, from Brooklyn, and I started the startup and then also started a family and decided to stay, keep both of them in this most expensive place. But at the meantime, like where we moved the office in October, or the factory slash office, is like the same landlord as this makerspace that I've been a part of again for 15 years, because they're right next door. So like our prototyping shop is now the makerspace that I've been a part of forever. And so we have a machine shop and a weld shop and a wood shop and a printmaking studio and craftsmen and artists that, like, we can tap into to build out our kitchen and stuff. It's like, luckily I'm not going for traditional VC money. We do have some investors now, but they're like coffee people, international coffee people that, like, I feel like our incentives are aligned. But from a traditional venture capitalist perspective, if they just looked at this business and this, factory next to the makerspace, it just screams lifestyle business. But we are ambitious and we do want to actually make this work, in a global way. Like, it's not just about the lifestyle. That said, I feel pretty good these days that I'm like getting to work with, some old friends and new friends that, there's DJs and artists and everybody has something else going on, but we all like working together here these days. And, it feels like both a real company, but it also feels like it's in a good spot right now.
Well, that's great. We're already 45 minutes into this chat, and I feel like we could probably talk for another hour, but I don't want to do that to you today. We'll just plan on a future chat as well. So
Sure.
I have 2.5 questions for you. One is, what's next for Poursteady? You have this new generation, you have this new model that you're working through your certifications. What's the future of Poursteady?
Yeah, well, I mean, we've shipped the first 25 units and we're building the next 75 right now. So this is our first real production build of the PS2. And it's, for our listeners, it's it's a 2-cup version of the Poursteady, and we've brought the hot water heating inside the device. So we no longer require, with the new products, we don't require work with, the third party boilers under the counter that we're pumping the hot water. It's been replaced with like a throughput, or, a through heater that's also PID controlled, that allows us actually better temperature control with fewer moving parts and less opportunities for physics to get in the way of delivering it to your cup. And it also has a user interface now that allows you to kind of change all the settings and dial in your coffee and all of that kind of stuff on the machine without the internet at all. And the internet, like the internet platform stuff, is still available. And in fact, that's really a project we're just kicking off now in series with a consultancy that we work with that has kind of a deeper bench. We're building the infrastructure for our new web platform that will support our legacy machines as well as the PS2 rollout. PS2 first, we're kind of rolling out with PS2, but it's definitely going to support our legacy machines as well as have kind of the infrastructure and flexibility for future product development. And it also adds the opportunity to monetize the web features because we give it away now. But, for instance, we can't really sell the PS1 in China because we use like a Google web service that can't operate behind the firewall there. And, it's weird to have an opportunity that we can't take because of, well, it's not that weird. It happens all the time. There's opportunities we can't take because of international politics, like
Mm-hmm.
the Russia-Ukraine thing changed our business. The policy, like the gender policy in Saudi Arabia changed our business. Like supply chain changed our business.
Never-ending roadblocks.
Yeah, no, it's part of me, this is what's wrong with me is like I get excited. It's like, oh wow, another front page story that actually hits me in the bottom line with my weird little company in a garage in Brooklyn. Like, how is it that everything is so relevant all the time?
The second of my 2.5 questions is, when we started, you told me about this sugar-infused splash of coffee that you had a long time ago. If you need to get out of the office for a minute and you pop into a nice cafe or coffee roaster in New York, what are you going to order?
Well, it's funny. Like, I really do still treat myself like that St. Helens coffee in 2003 or whatever it was, and I get like a rich, creamy, cappuccino because we drink a lot of brewed coffee here, and it's delicious, and I love all the variety and the coffees and everything else. But if I'm thinking about Poursteady, of course I'll have a pour over. But if I want to treat myself, I'll have a cappuccino.
And then my last question of the day, Stephan, is when did weed stores take over all the bodega corners? I was just in New York and I had to walk like 5 blocks to find a bodega.
I just listened to a podcast about about that. Well, one thing is that a lot of bodegas also are now weed shops. Like the Yemeni bodegas are apparently a significant portion of that trade,
I mean,
which is
there's
cool with
overlapping
me. Yeah,
customers.
it's a whole other podcast, and you should listen to it. I think there was a. It's not what is he called? It's I don't know. One of the Reply All guys has a podcast now where he kind of went into it. Yeah, it's a long story, but it's basically a funny unintended consequences of a bunch of very regional political moments that happened at a funny time that allowed for the most progressive law possible to be enacted in Albany that had no chance at all because Cuomo was in the middle of a scandal. And
Mm-hmm.
the only way he could bring back the left at all was to like stop blocking this policy that allows that prioritized drug offenders, nonviolent drug offenders, to get the licenses first, to kind of keep the economy local.
Yeah. Interesting. I'm going to find that podcast and share it.
Yeah, I think it's PJ Vote or something. I don't know. Like one of them got canceled. It's the other one. I don't know. I can find it and share it with you. But and then it rolled out during the pandemic, and the cops were at war with the people on the street. And the last thing they wanted to do is enforce a new low level law. Like there's sort of I'm not a big fan of the NYPD or its mayor right now, and there's a cultural divide between the police and the city that like just is. And it just meant that like this hippie law that nobody wanted to enforce didn't get enforced, and the bureaucracy moved so slowly that the people that followed all the rules got left behind because like the totally underground illegal drug trade just became above ground. And as a citizen of New York, it doesn't bother me that much. And in fact, I don't think they're kicking the bodegas out so much as they are filling all the empty storefronts, because there were so many empty storefronts in New York that like before the pandemic, and then it just decimated it. Like all these new buildings go up, and there's nobody wants to be downstairs. So like the street life is just totally changed, and there's all these empty storefronts, and then a new industry that like you don't have to pay taxes on, and nobody's going to bother you. Like, let's go. It's a crazy thing to witness, but I like a little bit of chaos in New York. Like, honestly, that was my last, if I get one last word in, it's like,
Yeah.
I moved to New York in 1990 and it was a totally crazy city and it was super fun and probably dangerous. And I was a kid, that should know better. And like, what I miss most about New York are like, the weird storefront art spaces and, just the little bit of the edge, the chaos around the edges, like, yes, people were victims of crime and all of that, and it's safer than 1960 here these days, despite the news. Maybe that's a little bit of an exaggeration, but it's pretty close. But yeah, it's like, I like to see some of the old New York every now and then. And having the chaos of like open air drug markets on every street corner like pop up in less than 12 months is it reminds me that it's not all turning into a mall. It really isn't. You try, but we keep coming back.
To your point, it's the same drug trade, it's just safer. Because it's in a store. Kind of.
It's like I don't know. Like, it's obviously a poorly implemented system. It was like best intentions gone awry, but I also don't think the stakes are that high. Frankly, like empty storefronts now have a local circular economy installed in them that like Uncle Sam doesn't get a piece of. Like, maybe that's a weird form of justice, even though it's not quite legal.
Stephan, I really appreciate we've already we're at an hour. It's awesome that we've gotten this time. I got to play with the Poursteady recently at SEA and see some of the coffee from our sponsors brewed on it. And I don't think it's an accident that when you describe it, you talk about the art and the dance of it, which is how a lot of coffee people talk about what a barista does behind the bar. And there feels to me to be a lot of overlap in that. So congrats on say the recent success, but I know it's a build over years of effort and change.
Let's talk about the future success, because it all still seems kind of precarious, but I'm happy to be here.
Okay, some key takeaways from the podcast. The Poursteady is a barista's robotic assistant, not a barista replacement. The barista is the hero of the story, and the Poursteady is the workhorse that offers precision water distribution during the process of brewing a cup or multiple cups of coffee simultaneously. Stephan's introduction into the coffee industry wasn't through specialty coffee. It was as a designer whose engineering friends and colleagues had an idea to improve consistency and efficiency in the act of making coffee based on their own experiences waiting in lines at coffee shops. Stephan helped them present their concept at a Science Maker Fair way back in 2013, and it was seeing the delight and joy on the faces of the hundreds of coffee drinkers, watching the Poursteady nozzles whipping around in a dance that made them realize they were onto something. Like many classic startup success stories, they essentially started developing and building machines in the garage. But in a nod to our modern era of work, the team was spread out, developing the tech that would go into the machines being assembled in Brooklyn. Over 10 plus years, the team has continued to thrive in a startup-like atmosphere. The Poursteady was looking to solve a problem, but it was engaging with baristas to better understand their workflow and needs that led to the development of the app and now the PS2 version with integrated tech. Stephan stressed the value of his network of creators, entrepreneurs, and maker community as one of the key reasons he finds himself in this role pushing the Poursteady forward. His relationships led to opportunities to be seized. Finally, the trailer for the movie River's Edge is on YouTube. I'm not going to share it in the newsletter, but it's there on YouTube if you want to check it out. Even for a trailer, it is dark and fairly R-rated. Keanu Reeves is not the main character, but he does play a key role, and you see shades of his future breakout role as Theodore Ted Logan in Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. Speaking of the newsletter, sign up to get yours on coffeepeoplepodcast.com. You'll see some videos and photos of the Poursteady in this week's edition, and get more background on this chat with Stephan. You can also go directly to poursteady.com to see all of their machines, technical specs, and details about ordering one for your cafe countertop. Thanks to Stephan von Muehlen, and a shout out to Kate at Poursteady for connecting us. Helping us bring this first episode of Season 11 to you is our podcast's presenting sponsor, Roastar Coffee Packaging, found at roastery.com. They'll help you tell the big story of your small business. They're also some really cool people who I'm looking forward to sharing a cup of coffee with in Wisconsin sometime in the next few weeks. We're also supported by other great coffee industry partners, including our legacy partners, Zumbar Coffee and Tea, Steady State Coffee Roasting, Coffee Cycle Roasting, Maria Coffee of that aforementioned Nicaragua peaberry I made this morning, and Cape Horn Green Coffee Importers. A special thank you to Alden Hazuri at Crossings Coffee and the Hales brothers at Hasea Coffee Source, who've been supporting our Coffee Smarter efforts. Our full city partners include Ignite Coffee Company, Ascend Coffee Roasters, Civets Roasting Machines, Me and My Uncle Coffee, Craft 42 Roasters, and Cozy Canine Coffee. Thank you for listening, for sharing this podcast, asking questions, and being coffee curious. This show, the Coffee People Podcast, is part of the Roast West Coast Coffee Network. This episode has been written, produced, researched, and recorded by me, Ryan Woldt. I hope this episode has found you happy, healthy, and with at least a thread of sanity left, enabling you to make it through another day. Please always tip your baristas, and be sure to drink good coffee. If you are in the early stages of your coffee journey, we want to support you. Check out the Coffee Smarter Education podcasts. Coffee Smarter is designed to enable coffee drinkers to brew a better cup of coffee at home. And Coffee Smarter Pro covers industry-specific topics for baristas, roasters, shop owners, and aspiring coffee professionals. You'll find both shows on your favorite podcast platforms or on our website at coffeesmarterpodcast.com.